friends, Professor Payal Nagpal has already laid the basis of a discussion, of a deep analysis of Tolstoy's novella or short story called The Death of Ivan Ilyich, and from there we can proceed to questions of depravity, questions of unkindness, questions of hatred, questions of ignorance, and all those things. And there is that sense of tragedy, as we discussed, that emerges from the descriptions. And Tolstoy is so very inventive in his phrases, so very inventive in creating situations, imagining situations that may or may not have been there actually, but which were there all the time around the experience that he went through. So we have lots of curiosity about the story and the points that Professor Payal Nagpal will be raising for us to consider. So back to you, Professor Nagpal, and please begin.
Thank you. So one of the important aspects is to, kind of show, to depict the ordinary. That becomes very important in this particular short fiction. So, cliched questions that, one would still kind of, be prevalent. So, did he suffer? So, description of his last moments by his wife. All this continues. And at the same time, his wife also kind of tries to become very friendly with Pyotr, and the reason for this is that she knows that he's part of the judiciary, and she wants a pension, she wants the grant from the government, and so she pretends to seek advice, whereas actually what she is really saying is that she would like him to kind of expedite it. So even in the wife's mind, immediately this is the financial matters are the first thing that emerge, and she is willing to, of course, absolutely try and befriend Pyotr for this reason. So he perceived that she knew already to the minutest details what he did not know himself, and she wanted to find out whether there was any means of obtaining a little more money. And on the other hand, his friend is thinking about the game of whist that they would all play cards every evening. So he's more concerned about the game of cards that he wants to actually get back to. With this, we move into the next section, which takes us into the life of Ivan Ilyich and his history, his past life, his life gone by, which had been absolutely straightforward, ordinary, and he says it was, to quote Tolstoy here, it had been straightforward, ordinary, and dreadful in the extreme. So the ordinary and the dreadful are juxtaposed in the same sentence, and I think it tells us about how the day-to-day life was turning out to be very dreadful. If we look at a lot of writing of the 19th century, this is a very important concern, and reminded of Flaubert here. So Ivan Ilyich, he became a member of the Court of Justice. How he actually reached this very high position where he was getting more than 5,000 a year was very, very important. He was part of the category of the group of people who were called the New Men, who implemented the Reform Legal Code of 1864 after the abolition of serfdom. And he decided to kind of get married. And one of the reasons that he decides to get married is that, it's in a sense important now for him to move to the stage of marriage. And again, famous lines by Jane Austen, I think the opening lines of Pride and Prejudice, one can totally think of them here. So, how a person with a lot of money is in need of a wife. So, it's pretty much the same situation here. So, and he decides to marry a woman who, it's not about it's not about love, but one who appeals to his superiors and their sense of propriety. So initially, Tolstoy indicates that, like any marriage, it's a very happy marriage about doing up the house, buying new things, and there is a very deep understanding in Tolstoy of the way in which marriage is also linked to the financial aspects. So the happiness lies in not understanding each other, the happiness lies in buying things together. And once that period is over, so and the children are coming, the wife is very, very, to quote, she's jealous, and she's almost crabby in her mood all the time. So she began without any sort of justification to be jealous, and she was exacting in her demands. She would squabble over everything, and so it is. The wife is certainly not happy in this situation. And in this particular story, the next point at which the husband and wife briefly remain happy with each other is the point when he gets promoted to the court of justice, and he gets this new fancy place, and again they are spending a lot of money, and they both decide to do up the house in similar manner. And Ivan Ilyich himself would get upset about small things like a scratch somewhere and things not kept properly and so on. So marriage is kind of reduced to these coordinates, or rather is made up of these coordinates, is what Tolstoy is indicating here. So to again quote from uh, uh, the novel, the short fiction itself, how Ivan Ilyich initially wanted to, he wondered why his marriage had turned out like this, and then he decides to escape from this kind of unpleasantness, and he endeavored to ignore his wife's ill humor, went on living light-heartedly and agreeably as before, invited friends to play cards, tried to get away himself to the club or to his friends. So this became his escape route in the marriage. And Tolstoy is, of course, saying that this is not an exceptional marriage. This is the norm. This is the norm, of the way in which marriage pans out in bourgeois life. As I said, that this is something that we have seen, in novels like Madame Bovary and many other novels of this period. So it is this line of thinking, and he expected only the very basic comfort from this marriage of being served dinner. So the wife, of course, is now only the housekeeper who's taking care of the house, of the children, and is providing all these comforts. And this is where, now all these thoughts are also Ivan Ilyich's thoughts about his own life. He begins thinking. He begins thinking of the, to quote from the text, the gravitas of it, and his power from there, to the acceptance of death. This is what is there in this, in the death of Ivan Ilyich. So from a life of prosperity, he realizes how he had gone through a bad phase, decided to go to St. Petersburg and look, for a job that would fetch him more than 5,000. And once he gets that, he decides to furnish his house very nicely, choose wallpapers, and even while he's passing judgment, he's thinking about the color of the curtains and so on and so forth. And it all grew up and grew up and really attained the ideal he had set before himself. So his life is spent in kind of, this kind of perfection of arrangement in his house. And it is in one of these moments that he actually gets an injury. He falls down and he is injured. And it is this injury that develops into a kind of dreadful disease. The doctor is unable to make out whether it's a floating kidney or a blind gut, and that finally leads to his death. So it's also, I think, the biggest irony lies in this fact that a very small injury finally leads to his death, but an injury that he had acquired while he was setting up his house and thinking about, the color of the curtains and so on. So again,
There's a very,
your
very fine
comments
link you
here.
have established between the mental injury, the injury that is with the morals of the person, and the injury outside, which in the form of the capitalist interests of narrow outlook and all those things. And I believe that he is able to weave a thread, we weave a particular pattern with the help of the marriage institution. The marriage institution, which is supposed to be defined differently in the 19th century, but as the 20th century would be approaching, then women would be carriers of the cynicism of marriage as it is evolving, and men also fall a prey to it, and the two together, they'll find the life moving all the time cynically around the institution.
And here I think increasingly so, because he's showing how the wife is, when he falls ill and so on, the wife is there, but she's more interested in her own life and going out and so on. But he's not condemning either Ivan Ilyich or his wife. But what he's somewhere saying is that marriage itself is now a kind of bourgeois transaction, and it's all based on money. So people, be it men or women, they're totally, their behavior in a sense is kind of determined by this kind of lifestyle.
So would you agree if I say that perhaps Tolstoy is defining marriage and the essence of it in terms of what the writer, what the character suffers from, cancer, that the kind
Yes.
of cancer is emerging
Yes.
in the experience of marriage.
Yes, and it's it's and again, as I said, the deepest irony here is when he at one moment he realizes that this he had acquired, though of course one doesn't know. I mean, the indication is that this is probably cancer, and one doesn't know how it had happened, and we are still talking about the 19th century. But he always connects it with the injury that he had acquired during. So I think that's
That
very,
has
very ironic.
that is very important dimension
Yes.
of the story, that the injury is not just the injury that we ordinarily understand to be, but something that actually takes over the entire life pattern.
The entire life pattern. And in fact, after saying all this, what's very interesting is Tolstoy actually totally, almost dispelling this illusion, so to say, and he says, in reality, this business of setting up the house and so on, he finally says, in reality, it was all just what is commonly seen in the houses of people who are not exactly wealthy but want to look like wealthy people and so succeed only in being like one another. Hangings, dark wood, flowers, rugs and bronzes. This just says so much about the aspirations of the bourgeois class to be wealthy, to not define their own lives in their own way, and to become pretty much like the hangings and the flowers and the rugs and so on.
There's no wonder that Tolstoy became such a rage, in India, because in the 19th century, middle class in India would think of money and marriage also, and then the woman and the man living together in ecstasy, a kind of maya, a kind of illusion.
Yes.
And that's why they related so well with Tolstoy, because he was himself for simplicity, for basic things of life, and not for organizing houses and guest rooms and all those things and the colors of the walls, and that they would be finally sucked into the pattern that the marriage necessitated.
True, and where in early 19th century we see in the French novel, I had Old Goriot in mind, we see how the ways of the wealthy are also very, very shallow and decrepit, and here it's the bourgeois class that now wants to kind of acquire all that. So setting up the house in a certain way and organizing dinner parties and to squabble and fight over a scratch here, a scratch there of not organizing the flowers correctly. This is the relationship between Ivan Ilyich and his wife. And again, yet again, and to carry the same in the same thread, he says, and in his case, that is in the case of Ivan Ilyich, it was all so like that it made no impression at all. So, all he builds up the efforts that are put in by Ivan Ilyich to set up the house, and he just kind of, totally bursts the bubble by saying that it made no impression whatsoever. So, at the same time, money and prosperity bring, Ivan Ilyich and his wife together briefly, but then the illness takes over. So, and one doesn't know what it is. There are these translations are quite different. So, in one it is a loose kidney, a chronic catarrh, or the intestinal appendicitis, and at times it's a floating kidney or a blind gut. So, here the insensitivity of the family towards him, in the sense that it's not as if they're ostensibly so, but they're not interested. So for instance, at one point his wife listens to his woes about his pain, and the daughter came in with her hat on, ready to go out with her mother. Reluctantly she half sat down to listen to these tedious details, but she could not stand it for long, and her mother did not hear his story to the end. So they are not interested in this man at all who's just set up the house, and they both kind of leave. And so she says that it's all fine, and I'll send Gerasim to the chemist. Now in all of this, uh, you know, uh, from this point onwards, the gradual deterioration is described in what would say a naturalistic manner. And it's very interesting because at this point, Tolstoy mentions how Ivan Ilyich picks up a Zola novel to read. So I think naturalism is high on Tolstoy's mind, because it is now a kind of graphic description of the way in which the body is degenerating, but at the same time, it is a writing of 1880s where interiority, the mind has become very important and acquired a different space. And we of course have a novel like Crime and Punishment that in which all these things pan out in great, great detail. So here too, apart from the physical deterioration of the body, there is an insight into his life. So there is a kind of, if one might say, an effort towards a kind of soulful awakening. So the body is deteriorating, but with this deterioration, the kind of questions that Ivan Ilyich is asking himself are, questions that would awaken him in a sense.
Initially, you talked about ordinariness in the novel, and that ordinariness is maintained throughout your discussion. And you say that this is the leading people towards a kind of disease, and they are not aware of it. But finally, when it comes, it will take life away from them.
Yes.
That's the kind of symbol.
That is a kind of symbol, but with Tolstoy, the asking, with the mind asking questions is also important. So it's in this moment of distress, when you know that the end is near, that is when Ivan Ilyich begins to ask these questions. That did the life that he lead, did he lead it the correct way? He doesn't have an answer to it. And it almost appears, with this constant refrain, that Tolstoy is asking this question to the readers about, if this is the way to lead life.
But you also suggest, and very rightly, that when the the world is closing in on these characters, then their eyes open, and they become aware.
Yes, that is when they become aware, even though all has been lost in that sense. So it would be, incomplete. This discussion would be incomplete if we do not discuss a very important character here, and that is Gerasim, who's actually a peasant, but he's the one who does all the work for Ivan Ilyich, taking care of him, and otherwise also he's around in the house. And Gerasim is extremely important, and he's the only one who displays kindness. He's the only one, he runs errands, manages the house, and he truly serves Ivan Ilyich, gives him comfort and genuine affection. The family is seen as somehow incapable of this kind of genuine affection and emotion, which is only seen in this entire novella. It is only seen in Gerasim. So, when he, had to manage his day-to-day affairs, it is Gerasim who helps him. So, be it holding his legs so that he can rest in comfort, it's Gerasim who spends long hours doing this. So to again look at it from the text itself, and I quote, Gerasim was a clean, fresh young peasant who had grown stout and hearty on the good fare in town. He was always cheerful and bright. At the sight of this lad, always cleanly dressed in the Russian style, engaged in this revolting task, embarrassed Ivan Ilyich. So, Gerasim started clearly afraid that he had done something amiss. So when, for the first time, when Ivan Ilyich calls Gerasim to help him, manage his own body, he says he thinks he's scared, he thinks he's done something wrong, and maybe he's going to get a scolding for it. But when Ivan Ilyich asks for help, Gerasim is only too ready to help him. And even though he says, Ivan Ilyich says, I'm afraid this is very disagreeable for you, you must excuse me, I can't help it. And so Gerasim says, he shows his white young teeth and he says, what's a little trouble? It's a case of illness with you, sir. And so with his deft, strong arms, he performed his habitual task, went out stepping lightly, and 5 minutes later, treading just as lightly, he came back. So it's Gerasim. He's the only one here in this novel. So which means that kindness and honest emotion is there only in the peasantry. It is certainly not there in the bourgeois class that has become extremely self-seeking.
So would you say that he's pitching the peasant against the bourgeois emerging class?
Yes, in the sense that, he says that be it the lone peasant, he's the only one who has humanity left in him.
How? Why?
So because he's the only one who takes care of Ivan Ilyich.
And because the one is a peasant, so one may have some kind of connection with the nature, with village, with simplicity, with the economic living.
Yes, yes,
So
absolutely.
he's going to render help.
Yes, he's the only one who's got a heart, who's large-hearted,
Hmm.
large-hearted enough to help,
Hmm.
Ivan Ilyich in his time of need. The others are not interested at all. And in fact, from this point, what we see is just a description of the gradual deterioration of the body, how he continues to scream for almost 3 days at end. Uh, Another very important aspect of this particular novella is the medical aspect, about how the doctors come in and they are incapable because there is no cure for this and there is no treatment, the helplessness that is there. But in a situation where there is no treatment, how be it the doctor, be it the family members, they all resort to stereotypes of response, but nobody really speaking even tries to give something that they could have, which is the emotional comfort. And what, at least to my mind, what appears remarkable here is that Praskovia, who's the wife, is not condemned. Neither is the daughter, but it is systemic, that now it is individuals who are regulated, who are determined by the demands that a bourgeois class places on them. So she comes and she says that she's been up for a while and so on, but she doesn't really kind of be there for him. So
Generally, Tolstoy is not known for his symbolism, but here I see in your interpretation a kind of symbolism emerging. That when you are away from the city, away from judiciary, away from the urban life, and then you are degenerating gradually. But when there is a person from outside who has seen nature, that nature can rejuvenate, and so there is a kind of death in the city, and there is a kind of life in the village. Is that symbolism emerging in this story?
yes, yes. And I think a kind of, again, which is why I think this writing is slightly different, because if one reads War and Peace and if one reads Anna Karenina particularly, the writing is in that sense more realistic, but it is because of this emphasis also on the interiority, on the mind, on, if one may use the word soul, a different kind of symbolism that is emerging, that the humanity is there,
Hmm.
that human beings are inherently capable of it, but they have destroyed that potential. And it's only when all is lost, when death is there around the corner, that is when
So
people think
humanity is
about it.
asserted through death.
Through death. Yes.
Because it's so valuable that when you die, you feel sad.
Yes.
I see.
And the individual dies, and it's close to his death that humanity emerges.
Hmm.
So to kind of look at Praskovia's words, Praskovia says that she sat down and asked how he was, and she has gone to the theater, and because he had asked her to book a box. But Praskovia's she says that she did not want to go for anything, but the box had been taken, and Ellen and the daughter's suitor, they were going, and so it was out of question to let them go alone, but that she would have liked much better to stay with him. And he then starts, he knows that he's not going to get that comfort from his family. It's very interesting, at this point he starts thinking, and he goes over his entire life. And when he goes over his entire life, especially his moment of great success, where he's become the member of the Court of Justice, he's got a good job, he does not consider any of this to be his best part. The best part of his life is located in childhood memories, in memories of childhood. So childhood emerges as an extremely important trope towards the end of this particular novella. And so he says that, to quote from the text, "But strange too, I say, all these best moments of his pleasant life seemed now not at all what they had seemed then. All, except the first memories of childhood. There, in his childhood, there had been something really pleasant in which one could have lived if it had come back. But the creature who had this pleasant experience was no more. It was like a memory of someone else." So
You're anyway talking about Wordsworth.
Wordsworth, yes, absolutely. I was just going to say that, it's more like Wordsworth, and, we just kind of, which is why in Tolstoy's writing, a lot of these strands are actually visible, and he's able to kind of weave them together so beautifully that the Death of Ivan Ilyich is really a masterpiece, so to say. So, that person, that individual has been destroyed.
What would you say about the early time of marriage, when these people got attracted towards each other, and they were having that kind of ecstasy, which would soon be over, and they would be a part of the rut?
So it's very brief,
It's
and he
very brief.
connects that brief moment, those brief moments, to
Mm.
setting up of the house.
Yes.
And the second time round
Mhm.
that Ivan Ilyich and Praskovia experience it is when he gets a promotion and they're setting up a new house.
Mm.
So, which is why that this kind of consumerism that is gradually seeping in is what is giving them comfort rather than genuine love and their company with each other. That's not really the
How do you
point.
conclude the story?
So, with this, what we have in the story is only a deterioration till, he says that there is a final death rattle
Mhm.
that he hears. So, the rattle and the gasping, it became longer, and finally he said to himself, "It is no more." He drew in a breath, stopped midway, stretched, and died. Almost as if it's an action, what you said right at the beginning, the dead always do. So this is what he's doing. I think the two important factors to take away from the death of Ivan Ilyich is how childhood is a repository of humanity and of the kind of inherent goodness in humanity. And this humanity is visible only in the peasantry. The bourgeois class is incapable of it.
So friends, the way Professor Payal Nagpal has interpreted this story, it appears to be quite symbolic, and a very telling comment on how things were developing, progressing towards or degenerating, in a kind of situation where some kind of, revolt was required. Tolstoy was not talking about the revolt directly, but then he was definitely calling upon people to come back to simplicity and to active life. So there is a kind of assertion at the end, and I think it's an interpretation that holds true even today, and the discussion has been really very elevating for us. So thanks, Dr. Pal Nagpal, and we then come to the end of the discussion. Thank you.